All right. Good afternoon. I am back from a short vacation. The stream had been running over the long weekend, essentially, and the agent had been going for 5 days. Honestly, that was one of the more surprising things about it, is that its system had been stable enough to stream for 5 days in a row before it eventually crashed on the Wednesday. We've been running since Saturday, all the way through there. So all in all, it was pretty good in terms of the overall stability. One of the things that is still kind of an issue is not gaining enough iterations when it's doing these because of displaying it, not having a kind of top of the line graphics card. Even though it had run for 7 days, it only got just around 12 million steps. So you're talking almost, what is that, like 2.5 million steps a day going through the process. Not great in terms of the overall speed. It's definitely faster doing it without doing the streaming. But it was interesting in that it seemed like there were a fair amount of people who were hopping in and out and actually using the chat. So I would like to kind of bring those back. We may hit a state where if I can get another computer, I'll keep one going with the stream running for the agents learning full time. And hopefully that can be enough to get it to get through some of the sections of the game. One of the key things that had come up was basically it would eventually turn away from Mount Moon. The thing that I put in to turn down the encounters still did not help. It basically was always the case where it would run into it would run out of moves in there and then eventually fall backwards. It seems like a large portion of it was just not being able to find the locations here. So I'm wondering if this is the right value here, because realistically, this was supposed to be the encounter rate for Pokemon. I was trying to look this up and see if I could find more information on it. What happened is it seemed like maybe this just turned it down more than it was. When it's there, it's supposed to be about a 4% encounter rate. It seems like that was still happening. I think one of the issues is that it tries to fight them, even if it's not in the kind of longer term best interest of doing so. It's still gaining some small amount for the leveling rewards, regardless of what Pokemon it has out there. So there is another way to do this where you tier the level up rewards to be based on the Pokemon's current level, rather than it being an aggregate of all the levels of the Pokemon that it has. So this way, it tries to level up some of the weaker Pokemon. I know just from watching it myself, a little bit of what happened was when it got to when the main Pokemon got knocked out, a lot of times it would have the Magikarp in the party too, and the Magikarp doesn't do any damage. It doesn't know to switch it out. So it pretty much gets knocked out quickly and then will black out, either because that's like this. A lot of times they only had 2 or 3 Pokemon. Some rare occasions they had 4, but they never really leveled any of them up. So it became a challenge. I think one of the ones I had accidentally had switched the order of the Pokemon around. So it had started leveling up Rattata, which is nice that it had 2 Pokemon. So it ended up having Eradicate and a Wartortle, but it never found its way through Mount Moon. So it couldn't continue using now a party of 2 Pokemon to kind of fly through the rest of the game, because it's in Mount Moon. It already has level 20 plus Pokemon, which is more than enough to get through Cerulean, which would also level it even more, that it would continue, I don't want to say improving, continue its exploration. So a lot of times what would happen, if I can pull up the screenshot here. So this is the end of a run here at 200,000 steps. This is the one that's right by Victory Road. This one is literally back in Pallet Town. This one is in Vermilion Forest, just trying to figure out what to do. And then this one is, I think this is in Pallet as well, that it didn't particularly learn. But then when I looked at some of the screenshots from one that I had captured partway through, for example, this one is, it got stuck in Mount Moon. It was training Pokemon basically at the grassy area right by it. It had managed to have a fair amount of Pokemon, but you can see here it got the Magikarp, and then it kind of went back. It found Pikachu in the Viridian Forest, and then Pidgey here as well. I had leveled Pidgey a little bit because it's easier to do in Mount Moon and the Viridian Forest, but it's now no longer proceeding in the exploration. It's basically given up on that and has now just tried to maximize the reward for leveling Pokemon at that point. So this kind of comes back to the give and take between everything. We obviously want the agent to continue exploring and learning the better ways of leveling Pokemon in stronger areas, of kind of proceeding through the game in a more natural way, rather than going back and like over leveling or farming out areas, just trying to find things or find areas to explore. I think one of the ones that I had here is the exploration reward is doing fine now that we had separated out the stuck penalty and the novelty reward. We are seeing the increase in both numbers now. When I had the novelty reward on, it was exploding out that exploration weight, but now I've got that novelty reward more in line, and then the stuck penalty, it should almost be a case where that reward is always positive, just because you accumulate the novelty reward more than the stuck penalty by how I designed that. And then hopefully it rewards it for finding a new square. But again, this may also be creating issues with where exactly those rewards are coming from. So the agent's proceeding forward for a while. It gets, let's say, knocked out at Mount Moon. It then, instead of going into Mount Moon, finds a new square on its way back to back towards Pewter City. And now it's like, hey, I found some reward here. Let me go explore this area more. And then it's going to go, oh, I didn't find these squares. So now I'm going to explore this area and accumulate more of the exploration reward and the novelty rewards. Whereas it's no longer proceeding as it would through the game normally. So it's, how to describe it? It is trying to still maximize that reward function, but it's not resulting in the behavior that we would like. It's almost as if you want it to maybe accumulate more score as it proceeds through the game. So finding new squares, for example, after it had obtained the Boulder badge, now it gets a small multiple on everything between, was that Route 3, Route 5 to Mount Moon, and the areas afterwards, so that it starts to grow its score more naturally. The other thing is I have a hard time understanding just how much of the map that it had fully explored inside of Mount Moon to know if it even made it to the right square locations. It seems like that is not the case. And so it may be, if I can find a way to group the score, let's say everything for the first 50% is worth double of a map area, and then it kind of tears down to the normal scoring afterwards. That would be kind of complex to iteratively put in, because then you have to recalculate every time, which, now I think about it more, is probably not the good way to do this. It just continues to be a regular challenge for how to properly balance these rewards and keep the AI moving forward in the game, instead of going back and trying, like, really being focused on maximizing some of those smaller rewards along the way. It may be, what was the event table? I think it's here. Deep Rock here. These are a bunch of the trainers, the ones along the way to Mount Moon, then Mount Moon itself, then the Rocket Thief. It's going to get Misty's rewards. The idea here was, or what I'm thinking about, is to maybe increase this reward function even more, because that would reward it for the trainer battles that it's having along the way. That should then hopefully, if we're rewarding it for doing the trainer battles, proceed through, and then the exploration reward is kind of insignificant, or not insignificant. It's still enough to keep it moving, but the main thing is finding the locations of those battles, having those battles, and continuing to move through. Let me pull up, let's see, from the last run that it had. It only had 45 event rewards. Basically, it made its way to Pewter City and then gone back. So badge is the largest factor. Just getting one badge is 100 points. 9 events times 5 is 45, which then outweighs the exploration. Its level reward is small. Let's see, I'm trying to find one of the runs that, here we go. So one of the ones that is further along, 120 in terms of the events had died. And this is the last iteration here. So died 14 times, 9 times, 14 times. Had 120 event points, which is what, 24 events that it had done. So those are any of these trainer battles through here. So that all seems okay. Exploration on those was a score of 60. The stuck reward was 44 for some of those. So almost getting as much points from the novelty as it is for the exploration. Healed the Pokemon a fair amount at 11 and 19. And then 10. So those are small. Small by comparison. The item rewards are honestly insignificant. We're talking like less than a point. I don't think that those are particularly helpful to the AI in terms of really learning anything about items itself. It did tend to keep items more often. A lot of times it was just throwing items out of the inventory before but this at least is starting to accumulate a little bit. If I can find the individual locations, which is what I started to pull out here, that by pulling out the individual locations, I was hoping that we could give Mount Moon bonus score in terms of its exploration and finding the way through. It is Route 3. That is the path there. So I was trying to pull these out and get them as a way to, I guess, kind of give bonuses, or at least reoccurring exploration rewards, so that it will hopefully continue to proceed through those areas. Let's see. If I go, where's the novelty? So it's going to cap out at 500, right? So for the first 50 steps, it will not accrue a penalty. Once we hit step 50, each step, you want to think about each step that the character could take. This also includes things like battle in there. So we give it some time before it starts getting penalized for being in battles, which is fine. It's learned to complete battles pretty quickly. It tends to use the high power moves more often. So for Word Turtle, for example, it tends to use Water Gun up until it learns Bite, and then starts to prioritize that as that hits a little bit stronger. And then it will resort to using Bubble and Tackle after those. So it learns to go through things a bit more, go through the battles a little more quickly. And one of the issues when we first implemented this was that the stuck penalty was so high that it was learning to just attempt 2 or 3 attacks and then run from the fight. So this meant it would start to get under-leveled and then basically just start to run from fights more and more frequently. One of the things that happens now is it rushes towards the rival battle, tries to fight it once or twice, gives up, and continues to go to pewter, which the dying once or twice isn't particularly a problem as long as it goes to the Pokemon Center that's in Vermilion. Otherwise, it gets sent backwards and then starts to accumulate that stuck penalty because it takes more than 50 steps, for example, to get back there. And so and so that penalty starts to build up a little bit. Let's do this. So we got the novelty reward here. I think this is fine. This is the stuck penalty as well. And here are the overall rewards. I think I'm going to increase this event reward. Let's see. So at the end of the last run, 200,000 steps, it had a total score of 400. If I were to double this, it would take that up to 500, and the focus would be on finding the events. Right now, the reason why it's times 5 is that it will always be more worth it for it to find an event rather than accumulate the stuck penalty. So there's 2 ways out. It can find a new square, or it can continue improving. Instead of finding a new square, it can continue fighting and gain the reward that way. Maybe instead of doing the novelty reward itself, I will just double the event scores. So hopefully it continues to try and find the fights along the way, or the TMs, or things like that, that will help it to increase the rewards that are there. The item reward, just going to take this up to a flat rather than basically timesing it and making it a smaller number. I think it's better to do this way. We'll do increase the reward again. Just put this up here. The die, we want to just keep it as small as possible so that it learns to heal the Pokemon regularly at the Pokemon Center. We are seeing that it is checking in more frequently, which I think is great. We see heal scores here of, I'll pull this over here on this screen so you can see as well. This is the end of the last run here. We're seeing that it's healed. This is percentage based, and then times 0.05. So this means that it's healed its Pokemon to full health multiple times over the course of the run. So it is regularly going back to the Pokemon centers, or at least checking in on them along the way to get their Pokemon healed, which is great. A good way for this to do it. It also encourages capturing of Pokemon, because when you weaken it in battle, let's say even the early ones, you're leaving a lot of times leaving them at like 20% health and then capturing them. That means it gets like 80% of the heal bonus here. That seems to be worthwhile. I am considering just dropping out the novelty reward of finding new squares. And let's just do this. Because I'm afraid that is what's causing some of the backtracking in its progress through the game. And I'm hoping, for example, if it fights, let's say 4 trainers in Mount Moon, gets knocked out, but it goes back and fights the 5th and 6th ones, it's still realizing that there is rewards for it to find in Mount Moon, and will continue to keep progressing through its progress there. Another thing is, last time we'd increased this reward from 20 to 100. Now it seems very intent on rushing its way to Brock, which is fine because it's got Squirtle as a starter, and it learns Bubble at level 8. And so a lot of times what you'll see is it'll have like a level 9, 10 Squirtle starting the gym, and it's able to run right through it because it will level it up from the battles along the way. And then because it's super effective against Onyx, it tends to do Bide either in the first or second turn, which almost guarantees a knockout by the Squirtle without taking too much damage. There have been times where it goes into the battle at low health, because even the first time through, if you get unlucky with, who is that? The Sandshrew and Diglett, the trainer before Brock, where they tend to do their attacks, I think it's Scratch and tackle more frequently, that Squirtle does take a fair amount of damage, that even if it resets at Onyx, it's still knocked out Geodude and gained usually enough for another level. So that way when it goes back in, it can kind of rush through things pretty quickly. What we'd seen when we left it with Bulbasaur as a starter is that it tends to use Leech Seed a lot. That, after you use it the first time, there's no value adding it, and then it only has Tackle left for trying to fight in that gym. And so Geodude and Onyx take very, very little damage along the way. And then the healing that is gaining from Leech Seed is almost insignificant compared to having a move like Bubble where it can just about one-shot. The Geodude gets one shot, and then the Onyx, I think it takes two. So if it does bide, you get it done in the 2 turns while it's charging to do the damage back. So it ends up that Squirtle ends up being the stronger starter for proceeding through the earlier parts of the game. One of the challenges that we will end up running into later on is once we have to use Cut. From what I'm seeing in the Pokemon that it has captured, very rarely will it have a Pokemon that it can actually count on to use those. I think there was one time where I had seen a Kakuna that it had captured, but unfortunately it caught it as Kakuna, so it had no other usable moves except Harden. And that essentially is a useless Pokemon then to the AI because it doesn't do the swapping. Same thing with the Magikarp. Not for Cut, but there are very limited options in the early parts of the game for learning Cut. You really, unless you have Bulbasaur, you have to have either Beedrill or Paris from Mount Moon. And it's very rare that it had actually gotten a Paris caught. I think there was one time across the 12 million steps that it had. So what is it, like the 50 or so instances that it actually caught a Paris, let alone used it, but it would have at least been able to have a chance to learn Cut. So I would rather let's hit that roadblock and try to approach it rather than try and code in things now for how to handle it. I do like Squirtle better as a starter as it just has more attacks. It seems to be more successful in proceeding further through Mount Moon. Even if you had Bulbasaur, it only gets 10 Vine Whips. So it runs out really fast, being that that's like one of its 2 attacks that it can use. And if you're thinking about in Mount Moon, the tackle is okay as far as damage goes until it runs into the Geodude, which I think those happen at like a 15% rate. And then it tends to just use the strongest attack, not necessarily learning the weaknesses. So it uses up the Vine Whips very quickly, and then we'll try and tackle the Geodude up until it gets almost knocked out and then starts to run away from everything. So it's jokingly referred to as cave fear, where the AI just does not know how to deal with the constant random encounters. I wanted to go and look up the make sure I found the right memory ID for updating the encounter rate, because it was just the goal was to try and turn it almost down to nothing, where you could actually proceed through Mount Moon without fighting the battles. It really doesn't need them at that point, but I have not seen a way for it to, or I have not seen it actually update correctly. Does this have encounter? So let's see here. Let's see here. It says the encounter rate is D887, which should be here. So if This should hopefully then set the encounter rate to 0. I know this is 1. So what I'm looking at, and I'll share this in the chat as well, is the memory map. What somebody has done is just from the ROM hacks of the game, they've cataloged most of what the memory values are. So I have a function here that will allow me to force or set a memory value. So the idea here in this, I'm hoping, is the current player location. D35E is the current map number. So then if so you get the game coordinates, this is the number, but I'm passing it. I'm not passing it to number, right? So where is the GitHub progress? So I think it's this 59, 60, and 61. So this is probably never happening. So let's try this and hope that it works. I may have to continue cataloging all of the locations. Because what's happening here is that I end up losing out. I don't have anything beyond, or for cerulean and beyond. That is a so once I get through to what is Search a City called? I forgot. Yeah, he's Vermilion. I keep saying, yeah, Viridian City is the forest, has the forest. Once we get to Vermilion, I'll have to start cataloging the locations to try and see if I need to add it for, what is it, the Diglett Cave, the Rock Tunnel, locations like that, where it regularly encounters wild Pokemon for as it's exploring the area. So what I hope here is that this turns off the wild encounters. This unfortunately means that we cannot find a, what is it? We won't find a Lapras, or not a Lapras, Paris, because the encounters will be shut off, which means we need it to capture a Weedle and level it up somewhere along the way. It's possible. It's just really unlikely that that will be the case, because that would be the way that it would at least get to cut. So I think what I'll do is I will bring the stream back online in a few minutes with the agents learning to go through Pokemon. Just to recap some of the changes that we had made today. We had increased the event rewards to be 10 times to encourage it to do more of the trainer battles. We at least are removing the novelty reward for now to keep it going. Hopefully the stuck penalty will be enough to keep it moving. Novelty, I think, had started to have it to go backwards in the map more rather than continuing to proceed forward. The item reward, I'm changing it to a flat increase. Instead of being 1/10 of what we had here, just to go through here. What's happening is every time it goes through the bags and it checks what's in the 20 item slots that you have here, if we hit a point where it is storing items in the computer, we can add those as well, but I don't think that's going to be too big of a deal. And then I'm giving it a limit on what it's getting out of the items there as well. I had set it to 10 just so that way it would hopefully encounter, or it would hopefully add a bunch of items and not be overly rewarded for purchasing it, because we are giving it the 10,000 gold every time it goes below the 10,000 mark. But I don't think this is too big of an issue. But it is kind of a guardrail to help keep that from getting out of control. If this ends up being too high, so this will look at each of the slots and tell me what is the item that is in there. I do want to potentially check for the item name. So going through the list here. Theoretically, I could manipulate what is the item available in here. So it gets, we're only looking at the item the value here, we're not looking at what the item is itself. So as long as it has a value, then it will try and understand what those are. Theoretically, I mean, go through here. We have the money. Everything in storage, which I don't particularly care because you can have 50 items in the storage. Held items for Pokemon, which isn't a thing in the earlier one, although they had it in event flags. Yeah, so if we have to, we can manipulate the wild Pokemon that it's encountering in the game to give it a Pokemon that it would need to learn Cut. But I don't think we need to implement that just yet. Like I said, the goal here is to get it to the point where it is at least getting through Mount Moon and hopefully to Cerulean. If we can get into Cerulean and beat the gym, then the next step would be to figure out how to get it to teach Cut. And so I'm hoping we can hit that relatively quickly so that we hit the point over the weekend where we are able to have another stream where we can discuss more on what to do with Cut. There are, like I said, a few shortcuts with maybe forcing it to capture, not forcing it to capture, forcing it to encounter certain Pokemon in the earlier areas. I think that is fine. Where we can check that map ID if it works the way I did. If it works that it disables the wild encounters in Mount Moon, then we can also have it be the case where I can then use those same memory values to force it to give a 100% encounter rate to a certain Pokemon. So that way we make sure that it has something like a Paris or a Weedle that is sufficiently far along to have it evolve and learn Cut. So it is allowing it to evolve just fine. So even if I give it like a level 8 Weedle that would have Poison Sting and everything on it, then at level, we'll level up once, it evolve into Kakuna, then level again, so that way it can evolve into Beedrill, which would allow it to learn the Cut. Like I said, we'll encounter that when we get there. So the hope here is that the next update I can say is that we are at Cerulean City, and we are now having the Cut issue. I'm still leaving it at 200,000 steps. It reliably makes it through Brock this way, even at the slower version not the slower version, when the agent gets sent back a few times to the beginning of the game, it was still able to get through Brock by about the 30,000 step mark. So having 170,000 remaining steps to make it through should be plenty, especially if we are disabling wild encounters in Mount Moon, because that should decrease the amount of times getting sent back and the amount of time spent in the battles there. The hope then is that this way it will be able to proceed further. So what I'll do is I'll bring this stream down, give me about 10 minutes or so to get set up for the main agents running, and then I can bring that stream online. It'll be here on this channel, and I'll let that run throughout the weekend, so that way we can see if there's any progress. So for those of you that are here today, I appreciate you here. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chats or in the comments on the videos. I'll be bringing the other stream online. I'll stay here for a little bit with that stream just to make sure everything's off and running, and then we'll get and we'll let it run through the weekend, and hopefully we get progress through the game. So thank you. Have a good weekend, and hopefully we have good news next time we see each other.